Hi everyone, this is Miss Trong. We're going to go over heredity, DNA, genes, and alleles. I know this topic can be quite confusing, so if you need to, please make sure you come see me during office hours or class time. Now, so to begin with, let's go over chromosomes to DNA to genes. As you remember, chromosomes are in the nucleus of the cell. So here's a cell, and the nucleus has the chromosomes. Now, chromosomes, as you remember, are made up of DNA. Now, thing is, sections of these DNA are called genes. Now, the genes is the instructions for physical traits. So physical traits are things that we can see physically, like on a person. For example, on you, different physical traits are your eye color, your hair texture, mouth shape, eye shape, eyebrow shape, things like that. So it's basically what makes you look like you. Now, different sections of DNA or genes, remember, because that's sections of DNA. So different genes make up different physical traits. So, for example, if you look at this chromosome, if you look at all these little black lines, they represent different sections of DNA because chromosomes are made of DNA. Now, if you could think of it like this, maybe this top section up here, that represents your eye color. That section of DNA represents your eye color. This one could be your hair color. This one could be your mouth shape. This one could be your skin color. And this one could be your height. Okay, so different sections on that chromosome makes up different traits that we have and we see. Now, it's all dependent on the allele. And I know you don't know what an allele is yet, but we're going to go over that soon. And dependent on the allele you have, which will determine what physical trait is going to be seen. Now, an allele is different expressions of a gene. So within a gene, you have two alleles. Okay, so that means each trait has two alleles. Because as you remember, each gene contributes to a trait. Now, each trait has two alleles, if each gene has two alleles. So for example, the gene that determines your eye color has two alleles. Now, one allele comes from your mom and one comes from your dad. Because remember, we talked about how 50% of our DNA comes from our mom, 50% comes from our dad. And if genes are made of DNA, that means half of that DNA is coming from, of those genes are coming from mom and half our dad. And that's why we look like a mixture of our parents. Alleles are represented as either an uppercase or lowercase letter when we talk about it. Now, for example, a capitalized R versus a lowercase r. And we'll go into that a little bit more in depth very soon. So, thing is, you're going to have to also know these terminologies. I know this is a lot of information to get through, so try to bear with me. Now, your alleles, like I said, could be either capitalized or lowercase. When it is a capitalized letter, this is known as a dominant allele. That means it's an allele that is expressed or you can see it in an individual. Okay, while the ones that might not be seen is called a recessive allele. But a recessive allele can be seen when there are no dominant alleles present. And remember, a recessive allele is seen as a lowercase letter. Now, as I said earlier, in a gene, there are two alleles. I said so earlier, right here. I'm going to go back for a second. Each trait has two alleles. So the genes have two alleles, one from mom, one from dad. So that's why there's two alleles. Now, dependent on how they're combined together will determine the type of relationship they have. Now, if you had one dominant and one recessive allele, that means one upper and lowercase allele in that gene, then, or for that trait, then it's something called heterozygous. Hetero meaning different. So that means having different alleles for the same gene segment expressed. Now, if they were the same, that means if they were both dominant alleles or both recessive alleles, they're called homozygous. Homo meaning the same. So having identical or the same alleles for the same gene trait expressed. Now over here on the right, this image is an image that uses something called Punnett squares. I'm just going to go over Punnett squares are basically a tool or technique used to find out what the probability of the children's uh, genetic variation, or what they have, what you can physically see, their genes, what their genes are going to be given the parents' DNA and alleles. So in this case, I'm just going to go over one example. These two parents have brown eyes, but the thing is, this is parent number one, could be mom or dad. They have heterozygous alleles because they have one capitalized, one lowercase letter. While this parent number two, is also heterozygous because they have one capitalized B, one lowercase b. Now the capitalized B is the dominant allele, remember, because it's capitalized, and that means that they'll have brown eyes in this case, because we're looking at eye color for this trait. Now, the recessive is blue eyes. So the thing is, for Punnett squares, all you do is distribute the letters. So if you're on top, you just distribute the letters downward. So the capitalized B, then a lowercase b, and then the parent on the side goes across. So another capitalized B, lowercase b, and another lowercase b. And it's basically telling you that dependent on what you have, remember, if you have a dominant allele, whatever the child has, they'll show this. So the child, or these parents, or these two adults, their offspring, their child can have any of these four type of allele combinations. So if they were to have, remember, a dominant allele or their child were to have a dominant allele, their child is going to have brown eyes. But there's still 1 out of 4 chances their child might have blue eyes, just depending on how the DNA combines together. Okay, so the idea behind what they have, what types of alleles they have, and what is actually seen, that's called phenotype and genotype. Okay, the genotype is the genetic makeup, so that's the combination of those alleles, so that's either homozygous or heterozygous. Now, and the phenotype is the physical trait that is seen on the organism. So that means that it's dependent on the genotype. That means whatever the genotype is will tell us the phenotype. We can't have the phenotype and figure out what the genotype is. We can guess, but we can't figure out exactly what it is. So I'm just showing you in this case, these flowers, a purple flower and a white flower, were parents, and then they're looking at the offspring. So it ended up having this type of offspring ratio. So, which, I mean, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the idea is, if you look at this example, at the end, out of all 4 of those options from the Punnett square, there's 1 capitalized P, 2 capitalized P, lowercase p, and then 1 lowercase p, which means that there's different genotypes present. And then dependent on these phenotypes, we can see that, remember, as long as there's a dominant allele, so in this case a capitalized P, they'll show us the dominant trait, which is the color purple. So that's why in the end, even though it has these 3 different genotypes or allele relationships, you're going to see only 2 different colors. It's either going to be purple, aka having a dominant allele, or it's going to be white, which means that they have both recessive alleles. Okay, so remember, genotype tells us the actual alleles, while phenotype is actually what we see in person or with our eyes. So here's an example of using a Punnett square to determine the offspring, or the probability of offsprings having certain genes. So in this case, it's a red flower with a heterozygous alleles, capital R and lowercase r, is crossed. And when it says crossed, it means they mated together. So these are parents. So red flower, which is one parent, mated with a white flower, which is the other parent, which has this 2 lowercase r's, a homozygous recessive. That's the type of alleles they have. And we know that red is dominant. So then if it has a capitalized R, that means that they'll come up as red because that's the dominant allele. So you're going to write down parent 1's alleles here and parent 2 here. These are just the choices of genotype. I just wrote it there for you, but these are the choices that you have for the genotype. Now, remember, all you do is distribute. So capital R's are going down. This lowercase r, you're going to write down. This lowercase r, you're going to write across. And this lowercase r, you're going to go across. So we're just distributing it. And we're going to count how many we have of each genotype. Now, do you see any capitalized R in these 4 squares? No. So that's 0. Now, what about capitalized R, lowercase r, aka heterozygous? Well, there's 1 and 2. So there's 2. What about lowercase r? Lowercase r is 1 and 2. So there's 2 of them. So if we did it in a percentage fashion, we have 0% because there's 0 of them that have capitalized R. There's and there's 2. Remember, 2 out of 4 because we only have 4 options or choices. So 2 out of 4, which is 50% capitalized R, lowercase r, and then 50% lowercase r. So that's like the percentage version of it. You could do it either way. Now the phenotype is, remember, we got to look at how many have that dominant allele. So 2 have dominant alleles, 2 do not. So that means that there's going to be red flowers and white flowers. So if it has a dominant allele, remember, that's going to come out as red. So we only have 2 red flowers and 2 white flowers out of the 4 possible combinations that we have. Now, what if we actually had the genotype capitalize R? What would that phenotype be? Well, it would be red flowers because remember, it has the dominant alleles. Let's try it now on your own. Don't worry, I'll go over the answers with you. Now, this is a green pea plant, which is just a type of plant that makes peas. So here's a green pea plant that has 2 capitalized G's and it's being crossed. That means it's mating. So these are the parents. Remember, these are the parents. Here's mom and here's dad. And it's with another green pea plant that has a capitalized G, lowercase g. Remember, green is dominant. So as long as green, or as long as it has a capitalized G, it's going to be green in the end. So I'm just going to show you this. This is the parents. Remember, parent 1, parent 2, and then we got to distribute it. So why don't you try it on your own and see what you come up with. Pause this video and then unpause it to see the answers. So I hope that you've paused the video and then tried the answer on your own, and let's just go over it now. So remember, we're going to distribute it. So I like to distribute from the top then to the side. So let's go with 1. I'm going to distribute it downward. Okay, tiny mistake, but it's okay. This one, I'm also going to distribute it downward. And then that's why there's a capital G. Then I'm going to go to the side and distribute it from left to right. So distribute this G here and this G here. And then lastly, I'm going to distribute the lowercase g. So this G goes here, this one goes here. Okay, so now let's count the genotypes. Now, how many capital G's are there? Well, there's 1 and there's 2. So that means there's, oops. Okay, well, I guess I got all the answers. So there's 2. Capital G, lowercase g, there's also 2, 1 and 2 here, and there's no lowercase g. Now, if we were to count that, remember, all genotypes with a capitalized G is going to be that dominant green color. So these have capitalized G's in it. This has capitalized G's in it. That means that out of all 4 possibilities, all the plants you're still going to get for these kids, for these two parents, they're all going to be green. Here's also the percentage breakdown for it if you want. But they're all going to be green. None of them are going to be any other color. Now, if you did actually get lowercase g, then you would get an offspring being a different color. So that's kind of how you do it. That's about it, guys. If you need help, remember you can always come to office hours or email me to meet you after school and we can go over this together. that's about it. So good luck. Bye, guys.